"What's this?" the boy asked in his infinitesimal voice. "It's fall. They're at the foot of the dunes, the reeds nodding over them. Mom is still in bed." "This is driftwood," the father says, touching and then picking up the chunk of tree limb, all elbows and knots. No better word for it than gnarl. "But what is it?" the boy asks. And the father explains, "This was once a branch. Somehow it got into the sea. He doesn't know how. Oh, the things father should know. But the water skinned the wood, opened seams in it, left it here for the sun to whiten through its daily examinations." The father holds the awkward fragment. He doesn't get into how we started out like this. Some remote ancestors, no longer fish, some gnarled origin, some knobby limb crawling up from one version of life into another. Doesn't say the boy, too, was like this in the beginning, pale and crouched at the foot of the unknown world. The father can't speak past the object in his throat. Anyway, the boy is done with the driftwood. He moved off to the clamshell. Half a body, an open bowl. Driftwood, a poem in the collection of tonight's guest in his book of poems, Some Unimaginable Animal. Good evening. My name is Charles Carr, and welcome to Philly Loves Poetry, a collaboration between the Moonstone Art Center of Philadelphia and PhillyCAM. The purpose of our program is to give our audience the experience of the rich culture of poetry in the city of Philadelphia and the surrounding community. So tonight we have yet another wonderful poet. We can claim him as a Philadelphia poet, although he lives in Washington and he teaches at Georgetown. And he's had a lot of experiences in this city, and that is David Ebenbach. David is a writer of fiction and poetry, a teacher, and an editor. He is the author of 10 books, and he's the recipient of several prizes, the Drew Heinz Literature Prize, the Jupiter Prize, and the Patricia Bibby Award. David's first science fiction novel, How to Mars, was published in 2021. And as I said, David was born in Philadelphia. He attended and got his PhD at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. His MFA is at the Vermont College. And he currently teaches creative writing at Georgetown University, where he works in the Center for Jewish Civilization and promotes student-centered teaching at the Center for New Designs in Learning and Scholarship. As I said, David has several awards. The Juniper Prize for Fiction for his book, The Guy We Didn't Invite to the Orgy. Patricia Bibby Award for We Were the People Who Moved. Washington Writers Publishing House Fiction Prize for Into the Wilderness. And the Drew Heinz Literature Prize for Between Camelots. And I want to mention some of David's fiction. As I said, he's not only a poet, but he has several books of fiction, and he'll tell us about it. And I want to read some of them. Between Camelots was published by University of Pittsburgh Press in 2005. Into the Wilderness in 2012 by the Washington Writers Publishing House, and that fabulous title, The Guy We Didn't Invite to the Orgy and Other Stories, University of Massachusetts Press, published in 2017. Miss Portland, an Orison book, published in 2017. And I mentioned How to Mars in 2021. David is also the author, and I'm fascinated by this title, The Artist Torah. And maybe we can talk about that a little
Yeah.
bit. David's poem includes 3 books, I guess 4 books of poems.
Yeah, it turns out.
Autogeography, published by Northwestern, We Were the People Who Moved, and Some Unimaginable Animal, which was published by Orenson in 2019, and its most recent book is
What's Left to Us by Evening, also published by Orison in 2022.
Well, great. Well, welcome, David. It's
Thank
nice
you.
to have a Philadelphia guy come back.
Oh, it's always nice to be back.
Yeah.
Thanks for the invitation. I'm
Yeah.
glad to be here.
So let's talk about, the title of the book that, I read in preparation for our, time here, Some Unimaginable Animal.
Hmm.
I was fascinated by the title, and I was wondering, well, how did you arrive at that?
Titles are hard, right? And my students are always asking me about titles, and I can only give them so much advice because there's something kind of ultimately unfathomable about where they come from. You eventually hit this one detail. Maybe it's a title of one of the poems, maybe it's a line in one of the poems where it feels like just putting a little spotlight on that might actually spread some idea throughout the rest of the book. And, I think we're going to get into this, but the book covers lots and lots of things. But one of the things that I think threads it all together is the physicality of being alive. Like there's food, there's aging, there's animals, desire, all this kind of physical, mushy stuff. And I do a lot of speculating in there about all kinds of animals that may or may not exist. But we're the one that I'm speculating about the most, right? We're kind of the unimaginable animal, and yet here we are doing all the crazy things that we do. So I think that's why it's a line from one of the poems, and I think that's why it jumped out at me, is it felt like, oh, secretly maybe that allows me to talk about us.
Interesting, their last poem, Ineffable,
Mm-hmm.
which is really, in a way, at least from my perspective, another way of saying unimaginable or undescribable. And I like the way you kind of culminate the collection with that poem. And I said to myself, there's things that are unimaginable, but this is a nice reflection of an imagination.
Mm.
Because in your poems, I mean, I find so much that's the ordinary.
Yeah.
Ordinary in life.
Mm-hmm.
And some of those poems that you're really writing reminded me of Gary Snyder, the way he
Oh wow, thank you.
writes poems. And then there's these. I don't want to use the word surreal, but they're very interesting. I just want to. Well, first, I like the fact that early in the book, and I think it's almost the first, that you talk about food preparation.
Yep.
And that's something that I love within poetry. But as I finished and reflected, and when I read it the second time, I said, "Isn't that great?" Because writing a book of poems and putting a book of poems to get a collection together is like cooking,
Mm-hmm.
very much. So I thought it was an appropriate use of that. But there's other things that beyond that, like throwing our sins at the ceiling, and that they continue to kind of buzz around. And I that's the kind of poem where you really stop and think about your sins and where do they go. And
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was a great way to express it. There was also the reimagining of the Garden of Eden as a city, and Adam and Eve kind of living somewhat like ordinary people.
Mm-hmm.
And all these poems that you have about first extinct animals, and then you're an art novelist, and then you say in these poems, I'm going to write a book about this.
Right.
That's
a go-to move for me, for sure.
So the breadth of of interest
Mm-hmm.
in this collection is fascinating. Can you talk about that?
Yeah.
How you go about putting a collection like this together?
Well, I think people do it differently. You know, some people, they're saying, I'm writing a book about my mother, and they write a bunch of poems about their mother, and they get them all ready, and then they realize there's some gaps, and so they write some poems to fill those gaps. You know, they have a project.
Hmm.
I don't do that at all. I just write poem after poem about whatever's going on, whatever I'm thinking about, whatever comes up, until I have this enormous pile. And then it is like cooking, because when you cook, you don't use every single thing that's in your kitchen. You go and you find the things that are going to go together
Right.
and make something good. You know, if a collection is 60-ish poems, I don't make a collection when I have 60 poems. I make a collection when I have 150 poems. And I go in and find the ones that seem to play together
Hmm.
well, that maybe the tone is similar. Like there's a lot of humor in this book,
Yeah.
and so I think they play together in that way, but also that sort of the physicality thing. That is I pulling them together as well, the animal thing. And then what you brought up around the ineffable. Um, I think, you know, we're thinking creatures. We're trying to figure out the meaning of the universe. We're trying to figure out what this is all about, trying to connect with something bigger than ourselves. And yet, we're probably kind of hungry. You know, I mean, we've got these big thoughts, but our feet hurt.
Yeah.
You know, it's like we don't smell good. We better take a shower. You know, it just, whatever these big thoughts are, it always comes back to the ordinary things. You know, you didn't figure out what the purpose of your existence is, but you still have to go live your day. And so this book, I think, tries to touch those bigger things, but at the same time, go about living our day, which actually is full of beautiful things and strange things.
Hmm.
So that's going on there. And then just to comment on it's a thing I use all the time that like I'm gonna write a memoir, I'm gonna write a poem about, I'm gonna write a story about. It is such an easy way to get into a poem when you're really stuck. You instead of writing the poem that you want to write, talk about how you're going to write the poem that you want to write, and then all of a sudden turns out you secretly did.
Uh-huh.
So it's a way of tricking myself into getting into the poem, and I love doing that. It's a little bit deceptive perhaps, but as long as I'm deceiving me, I'm okay with it.
And it's fascinating with the
Mm,
extinction. I
mm-hmm.
mean, do you have I mean, it's something that we're hearing about it all the time. The sixth extinction. We're hearing about extinction,
Yeah.
and I'm not saying you hammer on this in these
Mm.
poems, but it is there.
Yeah.
And can you talk about that?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, we're in trouble. I mean, I think that's obvious enough. And lots of other species are in trouble. The planet, I mean, people talk about us destroying the planet. We're not going to do that. It's made of rock and magma. It'll still be here. And there are species of bacteria that can live in a volcano. They'll
Right.
still be here. But, you know, there's some danger of what else is going to stay. So there's that's on my mind. But at the same time, I also am thinking about all the things that don't exist anymore, and not even through our fault. I mean, millions of years ago went extinct, and what were they like? You know, there's this, this actually is in my next collection, What's Left to Us by Evening. These researchers found a fossil of a katydid, and katydids make music by rubbing their wings together. And since they had such a great fossil, they were able to reproduce the sound
Oh,
that this katydid made, you know, I don't know if it was 250 million years ago. You know, unbelievable. And you can go on this site, io9.com, and listen to this sound that was nowhere near a human ear ever. How fascinating is that?
and what was the sound like? Oh, what did you?
Like a churring, you know,
Okay.
like just a kind of a churring, kind of a staccato chirruping.
Huh.
And I listened to it, I don't know, dozens of times, you know, just over and over again.
And there's one poem you kind of close out by saying, and when it's all over, it's only going to be the sea and the land,
Yeah.
and it's something to think about.
Yeah. I mean, so many of the things of the world, the universe, everything, they're just so much bigger than us. And that can come out in ways that I think are kind of reassuring. There was a day that I was going to vote for president. This was like 12 years ago. And there was we live in the city in DC, but there's a national forest that backs up against our apartment building. So there was this giant buck in between me and my car with, you know, all these antlers,
Hmm.
you know, and I'm thinking like, is this a Romney supporter? Like what's going on with this buck. But we sort of eased around each other, and I got in the car and I got to go make my vote, which was great. But it made me think too, like, okay, there's so many bigger things that are going on. So that's true, but at the same time, the things we do are affecting those deer. So I'm holding both at the same time.
Right. So, and this is something I ask, most of my guests is, what is your expectation as far as what your reader will walk away from, your collection?
Hmm.
Or is there an expectation? Somebody says, well, I just want them to like poetry.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it probably amounts to more of a hope than an expectation because, once you put it in the world, for example, how much effort do we each put into putting those poems in a certain order?
Mm-hmm.
And like, maybe I flip these two or put them this way. And people go in and they read in whatever order they want.
Right.
So you have so little control over the reader's experience. So maybe not an expectation, but a hope. Most of these poems represent a moment when I was startled out of the assembly line conveyor belt life, when I was startled out of just kind of doing stuff, and instead noticed something or thought something or had a hiccup in awareness. And I kind of hope that the readers encountering these poems will have that as well, that there'll be something disruptive or startling or interruptive about reading these poems. And so that's one thing. And then I'm realizing I also just would love it if the reader comes away feeling pleasure. Like, my students, I have to convince them that poems are not an IQ test where they have to come up with what the meaning is. Like, it's a fortune cookie, there's a message inside, and they're really worried that they're going to be stupid if they don't get the right message. And it's not about that. I mean, it's so much about a script for an experience. And I hope that my poems leave people, even if they don't know why, and they don't know what I'm trying to say, if they leave the poem feeling pleasure. But I mean, I don't know if there's anything much better than that.
Yeah. So, I mean, as a teacher, I mean, and you're involved in really, are you involved in spiritual life for students? And
Mm.
how, I mean, now, how is that playing out? And does that play out in your poems?
Yeah, I I'm not, I mean, except in the sense that if they talk to me about it, I'm not really involved in the spiritual life of my students.
All right.
But I teach in what is essentially Jewish studies because it's Georgetown. It has to have the fancy name of the Center of Jewish Civilization. That's just Georgetown speak for Jewish studies. And so, I give them Jewish poems to read, and some of them deal with these kind of big questions of religion, spirituality, God, meaning, what have you. And I find that very stimulating. And those are questions that I have too. I find there's very little gap for me between poetry and prayer. Even the kind of silly, funny poems or profane poems, prayer can be playful and problematic too. So for me, there's very little gap there. And increasingly, there's also this organization actually that maybe some of the audience would like to know about called Yetzirah, which is for Jewish poets. And they have a conference every year, and I've been a couple of times. It's a fantastic place. A fantastic place. And you really, you're around other poets who are thinking about these big things. It's a generative conference, so you're writing new poems. I went in June and I'm still on the wave of that. So poems are still coming from that. And yeah, I guess that's a pretty long-winded way to say,
No.
yeah, like a lot. Yeah,
Yeah.
those things come together a lot for me.
There was one poem, and I have a habit of doing this. I lock on to one poem
Mm.
in a collection, and I have the habit of kind of taking the theme and the feeling of that poem and kind of spraying it all over the whole book
Mm-hmm.
and trying to build my understanding from that. And that poem, After the Battle,
Mm.
does, for me, said a lot of things about the collection. But of all the poems I've been reading these days, this really captured what I feel that my life is like, what the life in this country is and the world is like. And can you explain the poem to our audience? I mean, I think
Sure.
it's a fascinating poem. Uh,
It's almost a fairy tale.
yeah.
There's a sort of there's been a battle, and all of the soldiers come away and they encounter this giant mountainous knot, and they try to untie it because there's these whispers coming from within of great treasure. But they find that every knot has multiple knots inside it, and it's sort of infinitely knotted, and the individual threads are knotted. And meanwhile, their enemies come back to engage them again, and people are dying, and they're still trying to get inside this knot. What's interesting about that poem for me, it was originally called City of Peace. I have a lot of city of poems. If Eden was a city, city of
Yeah.
nature, city of wilderness. Because I'm fascinated with cities, particularly the city of brotherly love, and um, and my editor thought it was too on the nose, so he didn't keep it. But the reason I think it's interesting that the original title was City of Peace is that that's the English translation of the name, the city Jerusalem.
Uh-huh.
And so Yerushalayim, the city of peace. And so, I don't want to obviously get too deep into such a complex issue, but certainly right now that is on my mind, and all the suffering and all the people who are just have their own agendas and they're just trying to untie a knot and kill each other at the same time.
Yeah.
And of course, one thing I'm glad about him changing the name is if only it only applied to that one place.
Yeah.
But it doesn't. It applies to the whole world.
Yeah, it does. Absolutely. It's a great, I would tell people, read this poem. It's, and you want to feel, I need something to give a definition of what my life is like right now.
Mm,
I mean, not only on let's say, the political, social level, but even on an individual, personal level.
I really appreciate that.
Uh, and so that's what I think, the master of poetry can be,
Mm,
is that it can give you a moment, it can give you this moment that you build, from after reading. And then people will stop and maybe do that. Say, take that poem, think about it. Think about it in reference to yourself and your own life. What does that say? And I think, even in explaining, we live in an age of absolute cruelty,
yeah.
right now, and it is that knot. I mean,
Yeah.
and the mountain seems to be getting kind of bigger,
Yeah.
larger.
And the knots seem to be knotting even more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So as we move on to your new book,
Mm.
which I haven't read, and I'm
Mm.
very anxious to get a copy of it.
Oh, well, I'll make sure you get one.
Can you speak to that? In contrast with some unimaginable animal?
Sure. Of course, there are concerns that go through all of the books, but they are pretty distinct in the sense that, so my first book, We Were the People Who Moved, is really about place and home. The second book about the physical, the animal. The third book is really about this, I think, spiritual imperative to try and hold what is broken in the universe at the same time as you hold what is beautiful in the universe. Living in Washington, D.C. is a very powerful force in making you have to confront that, because we were talking about this before the show, that it's a very beautiful place physically. There's a poem in this new collection where it starts, "In my neighborhood, everything blooms." Because it does. I mean, the bushes, the ground, the trees, and it's one wave after the next. I mean, we have new ones. We have so many, one after the next. We have new ones now. They've been coming since March, and they won't stop until winter. It's very, very beautiful, and it's a beautifully planned city, lots of green space. And at the same time, really, truly awful decisions are made there every
Yeah.
day. And you can't not be thinking about it. I mean, everybody's thinking about it these days, but there's something where it's like the local news of Washington, D.C. is the national news. You're late to something because there's a presidential motorcade as he's on his way to ruin something else.
Yeah.
You know, um, so, but we can't act as though everything is terrible because that's not true, and we also can't act as though just everything is beautiful because that's not true. We somehow have to hold them both. So the poems in What's Left to Us by Evening try to do that. Sometimes by alternating, sometimes by doing it all at once. Sometimes by despairing and not being able to figure out how to do it. But this is the challenge of life, I think.
Well, switching to what you do at Georgetown
Sure.
and the students and their interest in poetry,
Mm-hmm.
can you speak to, and summarize, if you can, where you think students are that have an interest in literature or an interest in poetry?
Mm. Well, it's sort of a bad news, good news thing, maybe sort of similar to what I was saying before. On the one hand, we're in the world of AI now, and students are increasingly turning to it to help them do work that they don't find meaningful or interesting. Teachers need to do a better job of making work clearly meaningful and interesting. But teachers are using it to grade what students are writing. So sometimes you have an AI grading what an AI wrote. The maximum absurdity, the absurdometer has broken.
Wow.
There's that. But I don't see a ton of what feels to me like AI work in my classes yet. And I think it's because, the classes are optional, they're elective, and this is a place where students, I don't grade them like, well, you misused a semicolon, obviously. I want them to take risks, try things. I want them to mess up spectacularly. I want them to get into the best possible messes. And so I do everything I can to encourage messing around. And therefore, it becomes a place where there isn't the pressure to make the polished thing that a chatbot can make. Instead, it's a place where their voice and their concerns, those are all actually valued for once. And so the students, so far, seem very responsive to it. So maybe there's a weird way in which this kind of dark moment around our voices being taken by a machine can give new life to something as ridiculous as poetry, because it is that place where
Right.
you can be present.
So, you've been through many levels of the preparation and education in poetry. Can you speak to really some of the poets and the work that has influenced you the most?
Sure. Jane Kenyon rises to the top of every list for me. She really does that balance of, she's very attuned to the nature in her environment, but also, she has wonderful poems about depression, wonderful haunting poems about it. I love her work. Ross Gay is a poet who writes about joy, but in a way that feels really earned through some difficulty. So I love his work very much. Victoria Riddell is a poet I've learned an unimaginable amount from. Mark Doty, I don't really write like Mark Doty, and yet I admire his work so much. And so I think it probably has influenced me in some ways. But there's something, actually, one thing about his work that he lathers on the imagery and the specific concrete detail in such a way that when he finally makes his big, almost abstract statement, it's allowed because the world is so rich that now you can kind of reach beyond it. So I love that about him, and that's something that I would try to emulate. Yehuda Amichai. I could go on and on and on.
Right, right. Well, this has been fascinating to be able to talk to you about your poetry.
Thanks for these questions.
And I hope our audience gets a flavor. I have to tell our audience, I really enjoyed reading this. You see, it's kind of been beaten down.
That's the way a book of poetry should look.
I read it a couple times, and I went back and I read it, some of these poems again. And of course, as I said this, I really selected out. I almost want to take After the Battle and, get a copy of it and put it up, somewhere in my study
Mm.
as a reflection and think about that. The knots.
Hmm.
Even on a daily basis that we try to climb over, but it's really time where we want to hear your poems and you
Mm.
read your poems. So I'm going to turn the show over to you and let you go at it.
Well, thank you so much.
Right.
I will disappoint you at first because it's my practice that when I read a bunch of my poems in a row, I like to start with a poem that's not mine, just because you're going to
Good.
hear a bunch of me. So this is Michael Chitwood's poem, Summer Job. I'm going to read a bunch of summer poems, and so I thought I'd start with this. Summer Job. At the end of the workday, you could tell exactly how far you had gotten and how much farther there was to go. Of course, it was just a ditch for a pipeline to carry the reeking slop that a neighborhood of toilets would slosh together to be drained away, but it was clean, the trench, the slick walls, the backhoe, bucket, cut, and the precise grade of the bottom. My job was to sight the transit. I gave a thumbs up or thumbs down or the okay sign if the pitch was right, so that some future day shit would flow just as it should downhill, but you knew where you stood, what you had done in a day, and what more there was to do, and every meaningful thing I had said without a word. So that's Michael Chitwood. And I'll read more about summer jobs in a bit. This poem is mine, though, and the rest of them are mine. You wouldn't know what day it is. I think I want to be the universe's favorite. I think I want the wind to carry cool melodies of admiration down to my ankles. But summer is all hot soup today, and even the roof is sweating. Pale green seed pods hang off branches. They look like pairs of limp wings. Nothing but waiting. Maybe it's the same everywhere. Maybe we all just need to eat something, something they made right here, pulled from this long field, and then at sundown we can only hope they'll be dancing. Something finally sweet, music you can hear from under the seed pods before they open. This one deals with my first job, which was at the Philadelphia Zoo. I worked in the children's zoo, and it's called Horse People. The first time I met someone who owned a horse, I was in college. These were women, 18, with special smooth pants, who missed their horses, who showed me pictures of them standing in that impassive horseway in a field. Sometimes the picture was them jumping over something, carrying the woman over in her black coat and helmet. We'd had horses in West Philly, but only at the zoo where I worked for all my teen years. I liked the horses at the children's zoo. They walked in a circle around a track again and again so that kids could ride them, and I walked around that circle next to them. At the end of the day, the horse went into the stable, me onto the 30 bus through rough Mantua to our own row home. Of course, I brought the smell with me, couldn't shower it off. Well, at some point I must have, because it's long gone now. And then I'm going to jump into, some unimaginable animal for a poem about, again, that same job at the Philly Zoo. It's called Fauna, and it starts with an epigraph by Merriam-Webster. The definition of fauna: the animals characteristic of a region, period, or special environment. Once that summer, my sister woke me, panicking about the rat on the porch, which turned out to be a ferret, a lost pet. We had ferrets at the zoo, smart animals with sharp eyes. Out of bounds, it was like my job at the children's zoo following me home, the smell of pony I couldn't wash off and that hung with me on the bus rides through torn-up Mantua. We lived just past that in West Philadelphia, where we also didn't fit. At the zoo, we had opossums, too, which were vicious and dumb. so that when I cleaned their cages, I had to distract them with a steel brush and yank them out by their two strong tails, shaking them so they didn't pull up for a chunk of my arm. I had read about animals, and when they trained us, I knew the genealogy of the wolf. I could tell you what pilot whales knew. One morning I saw an opossum on our porch on my way out to work. Now that was the face of a rat. Animals were mixed up all over. The dead-end mule at the pony track, the squirrels too used to popcorn, the raccoons I saw at dusk, part cat, part bear, lumbering along the curb. This next one is from my newest book, What's Left to Us by Evening. I'm going to read one poem from there. Also a summer poem about bird watching. It is possible that my son is watching this right now, and if so, hey boy, this poem's about you. Bird watching. I love you. My son and I are bad at this, so we only find the obvious birds. The sparrows that are a gray kind of brown, the seasonal work robins. Out with our plastic tourist binoculars and my grandmother's old fraying bird book, whispering on the sidewalk 10 feet from our apartment building. We take the pleasure of what can be found. Chimney swifts are special because they fly like bats. Or there's the sequin shine of the starling's neck, or our soft debates about what kind of oriole we're looking at. Once there was a woodpecker. We weren't even looking for that one, but it was loud enough that it stopped our walk that morning. We were on our way to camp, the daily drop-off. But first this bird, this discovery, this father and son slowing to take a note. And then a poem about mosquitoes. I do love writing about animals. It's called Mosquitoes. What you don't realize is that they're terrible at what they do. First of all, they're nervous about heights, anything too far from the damp grass. And then breezes confuse them, leave them scattered across the yard trying to regroup. A good table fan is like a natural disaster. And even with all that, some of them find us, follow our breath to our bodies, so that when you get one, that sharp red is your own blood streaked on the white kitchen wall. And you do get them. In our city, they're striped like tigers, but still they drown in the water glass. Only a few get away with full stomachs. But those go off and nest, turn a little of you into eggs. This poem is called Outdoors People. I am not much of a camper, so outdoors people. Some people live in the wilderness, carry wood and water. They wake up to uneven ground. Some people have chickens, even in cities, optional chickens, because of what they think about grocery stores. Some people on the weekend put a small portion of what they need on their backs and take it out into the woods, live there with it for 2 nights in their spine. Animals in the brush, but the stars, they say. Some people can't go alone. They stand at your doorframe hoping to lead you out of what you've made. Outdoors people. It's like they lost something in the grass of your lawn. They promise compensations. The taste of smoke on everything you eat. These next few are from my first book, We Were the People Who Moved, and talk about a beat-up book. Like the pages actually come out of this one at this point. So, but all right, this one is called July Morning. The noise of the cicadas is the day's noise, swelling into the white light of middle summer with the smell of the skunk killed in the road last night. Red cars along the curb in our driveways, the asphalt rough with gravel and gaps. You want to pull a warm leaf from these weighted trees and taste this morning. Inside with you, The refrigerator lurches into sound, calling out, perhaps, for another of its kind, as are we all. City of Weather. Unlike a lot of my poems about cities, this one is not about Philadelphia. It's really about D.C. City of Weather. It's all we talk about here. The way the sky, lazy after a hot bath, lies on us with all its weight. We change only to find ourselves damp again. Some weeks the rain comes and stays and leaves, only to circle back again as though looking for lost keys. You'll never find what you're looking for that way, I think. But the rain persists, interested in lost keys, but not advice. The ground forgets what it's for, starts to wander off downstream. There's nothing to hold the sidewalk in place. We close our umbrellas when we can, but here even the sun is a liquid, sweat on the glass buildings. The night pools around our homes, the night weighs against the apartment windows, and in the morning we wake as though nothing has yet been decided. Oh, this one goes out to my friend David Gwynn, who has painted many murals that Philadelphia has everywhere across the city. And there's a series of them that are 4 seasons, one of which a building got put in front of. But there's a summer one on, I think, 2nd and Queen. And there's a mural there that he painted that's just beautiful. Anyway, all of that took way longer to say than the poem takes to read. But here we are. So this is for David Gwynn, my brother. On your wall, the moon fat and low, a belly slung against an old undershirt. And oh, what a kindness to give us a heaven that has, like us, eaten too much. I'm going to go back to Some Unimaginable Animal for a poem here. This is called The Back of God's Head. And there's an epigraph that explains that reference. It's from Exodus chapter 33. And God said, "Here is a place with me. I will cover you with my hand until I have passed by, and I will take away my hand, and you will see my back, but my face will not be seen." So this poem is called The Back of God's Head. Late Friday afternoon, and the cicadas roll sound over the wash of cars from Route 29, plus someone's playing Let's Stay Together in another part of the valley, loud enough for the mountains to share. It's still daytime, indirectly. Everything is first shadow. Sometimes it must be a truck on the highway, the of industry. And the insects overhead are working as hard as ever. They don't put down their tools. They don't know Al Green, even if they're bent the same way toward persuasion. Evening takes a step. Out across the lawn, grass reaches up unhurried, moved by the wind that holds the note. And I thought, in addition to that, these summer poems, so summer's, we're in August. The end of August is coming. September's coming. So I thought I'd read some school poems for the back to school thing. I know my boy in particular is excited to get back, actually. So this one is called, although he's not in kindergarten, he's in college. But this is called Kindergarten Skills. Seeing yourself from above is a kindergarten skill, knowing your place in the rug circles. And so is looking at the teachers when they clap twice. You have to know what's fair in stuck in the mud, what's allowed in your pockets and hands. Then there's the cafeteria, all ricochet and tears until you learn to not hear the noise. The day moves you from station to station. If you concentrate everything on the bottle of glue, squeeze it just right, You will jewel the rough page with bead after perfect white bead. You develop, if not patience, a sense that some things stay where they are. Some of these new poems, by the way, I've been gathering into what I hope will be my next collection, looking for a home for that. But it's, I think, going to be called These Blessings Are All We Have. So, all right, just a few more. Oh, this one is called Private School. And so when I was little, so we lived in West Philly, and I don't know how it happened that my parents got together money to send me to Lansdowne Friends out in the suburbs. We did not have money, but somehow, I mean, I guess there was a lot of financial aid. Anyway, this is a story about, and my mom was working after the divorce, and so I had to get myself over to school as a pretty small kid. So this is a story about that, a poem that is a story in a way. Private school. First through fourth, somehow. I took a train to the suburbs. My mom at work, of course. I walked myself to the station, deeper into the neighborhood, through the unknown on the map, the there be monsters part. One time, an old man lying in the street between parked cars, the running blood the only color on his face, his arm up for help. Another time, a kid bigger than me pointing a broken bottle. You'd better run, he said. I did run then. I remember my winter coat not fitting on my churning body, my backpack leaping. In fact, I ran both times. I left the old man there too, with his nightmare blood. On the other end of the tracks, one of those old mossy stations that waits quietly for the trains and the uneventful walk to school. Every Thursday, silent meeting in the mornings. I didn't know what to think about. The teachers stood up with their morality stories. In the only one I remember, 2 mice struggled to get cheese from a stick, teetering on the lip of a bucket. And then I will finish with just 2 more poems. And now we're moving into the college era. This poem is called The Philosopher Points, and then it runs right into the poem. The philosopher points and asks them, what am I pointing at? The obvious answer is that table, but it's the 6th week of class, and he knows they've learned to doubt their instincts. So he says it for them. How do you know? This is how he starts almost everything. I'm pointing at that table. How do you know I'm not pointing at Brown? And he waits for that to sink in. Their faces are like dry erase boards. Or flatness, or just down, or even the air right in front of my finger. He only wants them to know that they don't know anything. His pointing hand is dusty with chalk. And of course, his own instinct tells him that's a table there. And he remembers when the department finally got approval for new tables. This one is conference style, has that fake wood veneer. He could be pointing at sameness or the decline of American craftsmanship. The students are silent, waiting stoic for him to pluck their last pieces of knowledge out of the air. Sometimes he sees that he's like a depressing magician at a kid's birthday party. Maybe he's pointing at dust. The air is full of dust, chalk and otherwise. He says, how do you know I'm pointing at anything at all? And he knows he's taking it too far. Surely someone will protest. But you said, you asked us. But the magic is strong, and they just wait for him to finish. He dismisses them. After they're gone, he stays in the room. He continues to point, aiming his chalk-dusty finger now at floor and ceiling, at space, at beige fluorescence and straight, smoothness, break, and flaw. one by one making them vanish and fail to disappear. And then finally, in the halls after class, students process like monks, like penitents staring down at their phones, those black mirrors, those rosaries, their smoothness thumbed smooth. An hour more spent at the chore of stillness, of desks, spent between urgent thoughts. They are emerging from whatever contemplation they built in those rooms. No sound now, but the air fills with their answers, their questions. Thanks so much.
Could you, I mentioned it in our discussion, if you would, read after the battle.
Yeah, I should have mixed that in after all the nice things that you said about it. Yeah, I'm happy to do that. After the battle, they moved farther into the land and came across what first appeared to be a mountain, but was in fact an extraordinary mountainous knot. The knot was so vast that they supposed it would take them 2 days to march around it. So they camped there at its foot to decide what they ought to do next, and endured a night that was utterly dark, yet filled with the uncertain intimations of voices. In the morning, they began their attempts to untie the knot. One of them had suggested that the voices were promising riches or other destinies in the knot's deep interior. It quickly became clear that the rope, as thick as 10 men together, was made up of many thinner strands, that each of those strands was knotted to others, that indeed there were countless thousands of knots at the heart of this one mountainous knot. They started to work in earnest, all of them picking and grasping and, in fact, tearing at it. They continued into the night with its voices and into the days beyond. This is how their enemies found them and how the battle was engaged once more. With one hand they pulled at the knot, and with the other they swung the sword. Their enemies, too, found themselves caught between a desire for vengeance and a desire to disentangle. Because war never fails utterly, blood was shed. It soaked into the ropes, and as it dried, tightened them, first around hands, then around arms and bodies. By this time, all were quite unable to move. Nonetheless, the fighting found a way to continue, and the knot continued to tighten.
We still have time. I also liked very much Sukkot.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Because that's so much, it's so much a part of, of your tradition.
Mm-hmm.
And I like the way you render it.
Oh, thank you. So there's a book festival in D.C. every year, and it used to be held outdoors. And then I guess now it's in the conference center all the time. And maybe it's because of this one time where the wind was brutal. But so Sukkot is a Jewish holiday in the fall that really celebrates impermanence and intransience. Mm-hmm. And so you build this traditionally you build a kind of temporary structure in your backyard and you spend time in there, you dwell in there. And this was right around the time that they had the book festival that year, and it was all intense. And so, of course, the connection, I couldn't avoid it. Sukkot. We dwell, as ever, in tents. It's the book festival again, the mall restless with covered pavilions and overhung with clouds that preach illiteracy. Wind shapes all these walls, then shapes them again. The first tent is where they sell the books that are just now being opened, sell them off folding tables planted in the grass. Here, people gather what they might love. Elsewhere, people read themselves aloud under the shifting cover to rows of unfolded chairs. Our senses tell us this is happening. The old wisdom tells us, you'll live like this for 7 days in homes that cannot stand. But these days are more than lifetimes. The world, which won't stand either, was built in 7 of them. Willful, we find the right place. We take our seats and listen to what we mean to hear. The tables are stacked with tote bags, with clutches of paper.
Can I take the privilege of reading one that I also liked?
Yes, I loved hearing you read the Driftwood, so that's great.
If Eden had been a city. If Eden had been a city, God could have relaxed, planted the apple tree in front of row houses, and Adam and Eve would have walked right by, down to where the corner store would have had bottled juice and mini pies and cider donuts. They would sit out on their front steps with some nice beets coming out of the window, faces sticky with flavors, dazed and looking at all the different skinny trees up and down the block, still springtime, thinking, damn, this is good. They would be full, too full of trouble, too full for trouble. Nearby, a stray cat would stalk the patchy grass along the curb, making quick work of anything that slithered. I love the ending. I love the ending of
Thanks.
that. So, David, thank you very much. This is wonderful.
Thank you.
Our conversation and your reading of your poems, and I'm anxious to get a copy of your new book. So I'll give you an address where you hopefully can send it.
Yes, can do.
And would you hold it up so people can see it? And once again,
Yeah, so this is what's left to us by evening, and it's got these. There are a lot of cherry blossoms in the book, so it's got a cover with cherry blossoms.
Wonderful. Well, I want to thank, of course, PhillyCAM and our crew here.
Yeah.
Alicia, I don't know whether this is your final show with us, and so I thank you for all the time you've given us in making this a terrific program. And I thank Don for being back there and being your right-hand person. So we wish you luck,
Yeah.
as you go forth. And I hope this experience was helpful for you at PhillyCAM and this show in particular. I think I always felt very comfortable because you're someone who at least expressed, a real love of poetry and literature and an admiration for the people that we had on this show. And that was wonderful. That was really wonderful. Not that other people haven't, but it's always nice to know that somebody behind the camera really loves poetry. And so, as always, I have to say we only have this program because of Moonstone Arts and because of Larry Robin and his tremendous dedication to poetry in the city. He just keeps on keeping going. Every time I turn around, Larry is doing a new anthology. He just gave me one, fresh off his desk. It was one about. I might be getting the title wrong, but essentially, go back where you came from. Was the title of it, and it was all these wonderful poems about, the crisis in immigration in this country. So thanks for tuning in. We'll be back next month with another wonderful poet. That's somebody I know, Alicia Askenaz, and she'll be reading her poem. We'll be discussing, how she approaches poems. So thank you once again. I love doing this, and I feel very lucky, to get a chance to talk to all these great poets. Good night.